He waited for his bride at the gate. But a dwarf woman appeared and changed everything. Daniel James adjusted his leather hat for the third time that September morning. His hands trembled as he held the crumpled letter he had read so many times. The words were already blurred. Grace would arrive today on the 11 o'clock wagon, coming from Asheville to marry him. 6 months of exchanged letters, 6 months dreaming of this woman who wrote with such delicacy about life in the country, about her dreams of having a family and caring for the land. The dust raised by the road announced the wagon's arrival long before he could see the horses. Daniel James wiped his sweaty hands on his denim overalls and walked to the gate of St. Margaret's Ranch. His heart beat like a drum at a county fair. Mrs. Margaret, his mother, watched from the porch of the main house, shielding her eyes from the sun with her gloved hand. When the wagon stopped in front of the gate, Daniel James expected to see a tall, strong woman step down, as he had imagined from the descriptions in the letters. Grace wrote that she helped her father with the cattle, that she knew how to plant and harvest, that she wasn't afraid of hard work. In his mind, she would be sturdy like the women of the region, with strong arms and a broad smile. The first thing he saw was a small hand extended to the wagon driver. Then, a carefully pressed beige linen dress. When Grace stepped onto the dusty ground, Daniel James felt the world spin backward. The woman before him was only 4 feet tall, with proportionally small arms and a delicate face that watched him with expectation and nervousness. "You must be Daniel James," she said in a soft voice, giving a small bow. "I am Grace Mitchell Patterson. I believe you were expecting me." Daniel James stood paralyzed. He looked at the wagon, as if expecting another woman to appear from behind the luggage. The driver unloaded 2 leather suitcases and a wooden box, placing everything on the ground without ceremony. "That'll be $20, the man grumbled, extending his dirty hand to Daniel James. Still in shock, Daniel James paid the fare without taking his eyes off Grace. She remained standing, with her hands crossed in front of her body, waiting for some reaction from him. The simple but well-kept dress contrasted with her delicate features. Her brown hair was tied in a low bun, and she carried a small brown leather purse. "Was there some mistake?" she asked, and Daniel James detected a familiar sadness in her voice, as if she already knew the answer. From the porch, Mrs. Margaret hurried down the steps, her skirts swaying as she walked toward the gate. At 62, she had run the ranch with an iron fist since becoming a widow, and had always made it clear that she expected a daughter-in-law worthy of the Harrison family. "Daniel James!" she shouted, still several meters away. "What's going on here?" Grace turned to greet the older woman, but Mrs. Margaret stopped abruptly when she saw the young woman. Her face hardened, and she shot a furious look at her son. "Mother, this is Grace," Daniel James said with a choked voice. "The young woman from the letters." "From the letters," Mrs. Margaret repeated, incredulous. "This young woman here?" Grace took a step forward, maintaining her dignity despite the visible embarrassment. "Mrs. Margaret, I imagine your son has spoken of me. I wrote to him for months about our possible marriage." "You wrote those letters?" Mrs. Margaret asked, not hiding her astonishment. "Yes, ma'am. Every word was mine. I'm sorry if there was any confusion about my appearance. My sister Victoria was the one who sent the photograph, and she—" Grace stopped mid-sentence, biting her lip. Daniel James realized there was more to this story, something she didn't want to reveal in front of strangers. "Come in," he said finally, taking her bags. "Let's talk inside." Mrs. Margaret whispered something in her son's ear as they walked along the stone path leading to the house. Daniel James shook his head, indicating it wasn't the time for discussions. Grace walked behind them, observing the property with attentive eyes. The main house of St. Margaret's Ranch was built in colonial style, with thick adobe walls and red clay roof tiles. A well-kept garden surrounded the building, and several fruit trees offered shade in the backyard. Grace noticed the organized flower beds and the medicinal plants growing near the kitchen. "What a beautiful garden," she commented. "I see you grow lemon balm, boldo, and mint. The soil here must be very good." Daniel James looked at her in surprise. During the months of correspondence, Grace had mentioned knowledge about plants, but he didn't expect her to recognize the species from a distance. "You understand plants?" he asked. "I grew up helping my father on the farm," she replied. He always said a good homemaker needs to know the plants that heal and the ones that feed. Mrs. Margaret, who was walking ahead, slowed her pace to listen better. Despite her initial surprise, she was a practical woman and always respected those who understood rural life. They entered through the kitchen, where a pot of beans boiled on the wood stove and the smell of fresh bread hung in the air. Daniel James pointed to a straw chair for Grace to sit at the large solid wood table. Mrs. Margaret served coffee in white porcelain cups and sat opposite, studying the visitor with critical eyes. "So," began Mrs. Margaret, "you came from Asheville to marry my son." "I came with that intention, yes, ma'am," Grace replied, keeping her posture straight. "But I understand the circumstances have changed. It wasn't my intention to cause embarrassment to anyone." Daniel James stirred the sugar in his coffee with nervous movements. Grace's letters had arrived at a difficult time in his life. At 32, he was still single and felt the pressure from his mother to find a wife. When an acquaintance from Asheville suggested corresponding with a farmer's daughter, he thought it would be the perfect solution. Grace's letters were different from anything he had ever read. She wrote about books, about the seasons, about the small pleasures of country life. She told stories about the animals on her father's farm, about the recipes she learned from her grandmother, about the dreams she had for the future. Daniel James had fallen in love with that sweet and intelligent voice on paper. "In your letters," he said hesitantly, "you never mentioned that." "That I have dwarfism," Grace completed, without beating around the bush. "My sister Victoria said it was better not to talk about it in the first letters. She thought men would shy away before even getting to know me." "And she was right," Mrs. Margaret murmured, earning a disapproving look from her son. Grace carefully placed her coffee cup on the table and looked directly at Daniel James. "I understand your surprise and accept if you want to cancel everything. I can take the next wagon back to Asheville. I only ask that you allow me to stay tonight because the journey was long and I'm tired." The dignity with which she spoke touched something in Daniel James's chest. He remembered the letters in which she described her determination to overcome difficulties, her courage to face the prejudices she encountered. Now, seeing her there, small but proud, he understood that this courage was real. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "I won't send you away like some lost animal. Let's have dinner together and talk properly." Mrs. Margaret rose from the table with a displeased expression. "I'll prepare the guest room," she said, leaving the kitchen with firm steps. Grace sighed and looked out the window where the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. "She has reason to be disappointed," she said. "I imagine she expected a different daughter-in-law." "My mother expected many things I could never give her," Daniel James replied. "A daughter-in-law was just one more on the list." They remained silent for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the ranch. Chickens scratched in the dirt, a rooster crowed in the distance, and the wind rustled the leaves of the jaboticaba tree in the backyard. Grace closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I missed these sounds," she said. "In Asheville, after Dad got sick, I had to sell most of the cattle. The ranch became very quiet. Is your father still ill?" "He passed away last winter," Grace answered softly. "He was a good man, taught me everything about the land. He always said I was small in body but big in heart." Daniel James felt a tightness in his chest. In her letters she had mentioned her father's illness, but always with hope for improvement. Now he understood why she had accepted the marriage proposal from a stranger. Grace was alone in the world. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "Thank you. Dad used to say that God makes people the size they need to be to fulfill their purpose in life. I've always believed that." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When Mrs. Margaret returned, she had changed her clothes and combed her hair. It was her custom to dress up for dinner, even when there were no visitors. She set the table with the family's best china and lit candles, despite the natural light still coming through the window. "Grace, could you help me with the salad?" she asked, pointing to a bowl of greens. "With pleasure, Mrs. Margaret." Grace washed her hands and began cutting the tomatoes with precise movements. Mrs. Margaret noticed that she knew how to use a knife skillfully and understood the right moment to season the food. When she tasted the salad seasoned by Grace, She couldn't hide her surprise. "What seasoning is this?" she asked. "Fresh basil, a bit of oregano, and a few drops of lemon," Grace replied. "My grandmother taught me that herbs from the garden always make food tastier than store-bought ones." During dinner, the conversation flowed more naturally. Grace demonstrated surprising knowledge about animal husbandry, planting techniques, and food preservation. When Daniel James mentioned problems he was having with a pest in the cornfield, she suggested some solutions he had never considered. "My father struggled with the same thing," she explained. "We found that planting beans between the rows of corn helps control the insects. The two plants help each other." Daniel James was impressed. He had tried various ways to solve the problem and hadn't achieved satisfactory results. "You really understand agriculture," he said. "I grew up doing it. When you're small like me, you need to compensate with knowledge. I can't carry 100-pound bags, but I can know exactly when to plant, how to care for the land, and when to harvest." Mrs. Margaret, who had been quiet during the explanation, leaned forward in her chair. "And do you know how to read and write well? Because I saw that the letters that arrived here were very well written. My father made sure to give me an education. He said a woman needs to know how to defend herself with words when she can't use force." "Wise," admitted Mrs. Margaret. "And about money. Do you know how to handle numbers, accounting?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been taking care of our ranch's accounts since I was 15. Daniel James realized that his mother was testing Grace, looking for flaws that would justify her rejection. But with each response, Grace proved to be more prepared and competent than many women in the region. After dinner, while Grace was in her room tidying her things, Mrs. Margaret called her son for a private conversation in the office. The dark wood-paneled walls and heavy furniture made the atmosphere seem even more serious. "Daniel James, this girl cannot stay here," she said, closing the door. "Why not, Mom?" "You know very well why. What will people say in town? What will they think at church? The Harrison family has always been respected in this region. So what?" "What do you mean, so what, Mrs. Margaret raised her voice. "Do you want to become a laughingstock? Do you want them to say my son couldn't find a normal woman?" Daniel James felt anger rising in his chest. All his life he had tried to please his mother and meet her expectations. He had always been the obedient son who took over the ranch when his father passed away, who gave up his own dreams to take care of the family. "Normal woman," he repeated. "Did you see how intelligent she is? She knows more about farming than half the men in this town." "That doesn't matter, Daniel James. People will look at you and laugh. They'll make jokes behind your back. And since when do other people's opinions matter more than my happiness?" Mrs. Margaret fell silent for a moment, surprised by her son's reaction. He rarely confronted her this way. "Your happiness," she said. "You barely know this girl. How can you talk about happiness? I've known her for 6 months through letters. I know she's kind, intelligent, hard-working. I know she has dreams similar to mine. But you didn't know she was like this." "Like what, Mom? Short. So what? Does her size change anything about what I've learned about her character?" Mrs. Margaret sighed and sat in the leather armchair that had belonged to her husband. "Daniel James, I only want what's best for you. I want you to be happy, to have healthy children, to be respected in the community. And you think that's impossible if I marry Grace?" "I think it will be very difficult. People are cruel, son. They'll make your life hell." Daniel James walked to the window and looked out at the yard, where Grace was walking among the chickens, observing the animals carefully. Even at the end of the day, she was studying the ranch, trying to understand how everything worked. "Maybe people are indeed cruel," he said. "But that can't be a reason for me to dismiss a good woman." "So, you're going to marry her?" "I don't know yet. I need to talk more with her. Talk more. But I won't send her away just because she's different from what I expected." Mrs. Margaret shook her head, defeated. "Fine. But if you decide to go ahead with this marriage, don't come complaining to me when problems arise." The next morning, Daniel James woke up early as usual, but found Grace already in the kitchen preparing coffee. She had figured out where everything was and organized it all with the efficiency of someone used to waking before sunrise. "Good morning," she said, pouring steaming coffee into a large mug. "I hope you don't mind that I used your kitchen." "Of course not," he replied, still amazed by her initiative. Do you always wake up this early? At my daddy's ranch, I got up at 5 to milk the cows. It's a hard habit to break. Daniel James drank the coffee, which was stronger and more flavorful than usual. Did you put something different in the coffee? Just a little cinnamon. My grandmother used to say cinnamon in morning coffee keeps the day's troubles away. They drank coffee in comfortable silence, listening to the first sounds of the ranch. Daniel James watched how Grace moved around the kitchen, reaching everything she needed despite her height. She had placed a small stool next to the stove to have better access to the pots. "Grace," he said, "I want you to know I'm trying to understand all this. It's not easy for me." "I understand," she replied. "It's not easy for me either. I always knew I'd have to have this conversation with someone someday." "Have you been through this before?" Grace hesitated before answering. "There was a young man in Asheville a few years ago. We met at church and he showed interest. We'd talk after Mass. He even walked me home a few times." "What happened?" "When he proposed and I accepted, his family gathered to meet the future bride. They were polite during dinner, but later I overheard his mother talking with other ladies in the garden. She said she couldn't allow her son to marry an imperfect woman, that their grandchildren might be born with problems." Daniel James felt indignation growing in his chest. "And the young man? What did he do?" "The next day he came to my father's ranch to break off the engagement, said he'd thought it over and concluded it wouldn't work out. He apologized but couldn't look me in the eyes. I'm sorry. That day I promised myself I'd never subject myself to that humiliation again. That's why I accepted corresponding with you. I thought if we got to know each other through letters first, you'd fall for the person I am inside." Daniel James swallowed hard. Her honesty was both touching and frightening. "And you? Did you ever fall for me through the letters?" Grace blushed slightly. "Your letters were kind and sincere. You spoke about the ranch as if it were a beloved person, about the plans you had for the future. I even imagined what our life together would be like." "What life did you imagine?" "A simple life, but full of purpose. Waking up early to tend the animals, working in the garden, preparing meals with produce from our land, maybe even having children to teach everything I've learned." The mention of children created a heavy silence between them. Daniel James knew this was one of his mother's biggest concerns, and it would likely be grounds for malicious comments in the community. "Do you want children?" he asked. "Yes, I do. And before you ask, the doctor in Asheville told me there's no impediment. Dwarfism doesn't automatically pass to children, and my body is perfectly capable of carrying a child." Her frankness made Daniel James ashamed for having thought of the question, but at the same time, he felt relieved she'd addressed the matter without embarrassment. "Sorry for thinking about that," he said. "No need to apologize. It's natural to have these doubts. I prefer to clarify everything from the start to avoid misunderstandings later." Mrs. Margaret appeared in the kitchen at that moment, interrupting the conversation. She greeted Grace with cold courtesy and poured herself some coffee. "Daniel James, today is the day to take the pigs to the market in town," she said. "You'll need to leave early." "May I come along?" asked Grace. "I'd like to see the town and maybe buy some things I need." Mrs. Margaret and Daniel James exchanged a look. The market was where all the families in the area gathered, where gossip circulated, and where news was discussed for weeks. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," said Daniel James. "People might be curious." "I understand," Grace replied with dignity. "You're ashamed to be seen with me." The accusation hit Daniel James like a punch to the stomach. He looked at her and saw the hurt in her brown eyes. "That's not it," he tried to explain. "Yes, it is," she interrupted. "And I don't blame you. I'm ashamed of myself sometimes, too." Grace rose from the table and walked toward the guest room. Daniel James remained seated, feeling like the worst kind of coward. Mrs. Margaret finished her coffee in silence, avoiding looking at her son. An hour later, when Daniel James was loading the pigs into the wagon, Grace appeared in the yard wearing her best dress and carrying the leather bag. "I changed my mind," she said. "I'm going with you to town." "Grace, if we're going to get married, people will see us together sooner or later. Better it be now." Daniel James looked at her, admiring the courage she showed. He nodded and helped her up into the wagon. The trip to town took 40 minutes along dusty roads. Grace watched the landscape with interest, commenting on the types of soil and the crops they saw along the way. Her agricultural knowledge impressed Daniel James once again. When they arrived at the central square where the market was taking place, several people immediately noticed Grace's presence. The curious look soon turned into whispers and murmured comments. "Look who Daniel James brought," one woman murmured to her neighbor. "Poor thing couldn't find a normal woman," commented another. Daniel James felt his face grow hot with shame and anger. Grace kept her head held high and a polite smile, as if she didn't hear the comments. At the fabric stall, the saleswoman was polite, but couldn't hide her curiosity. "And is this your fiancée, Daniel James?" she asked, feigning naturalness. "This is Grace," he replied, avoiding confirming or denying the engagement. "Pleased to meet you," the saleswoman said to Grace. "Where are you from?" "From Asheville," Grace answered firmly. "I came to meet Daniel James's family." The diplomatic answer didn't satisfy the woman's curiosity, but she didn't press further. Grace bought a few yards of blue fabric and sewing thread, paying with her own money and refusing Daniel James's offer to cover the cost. At other stalls, the reception was similar. People were polite, but visibly curious. Some children pointed at Grace and were quickly scolded by their parents. Daniel James noticed that she pretended not to notice, but her shoulders grew tense throughout the morning. The most awkward moment happened when they met Colonel Theodore, the most influential man in the area. He greeted Daniel James cordially but looked at Grace as if she were a circus curiosity. "And who is this young lady?" he asked with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Grace Mitchell Patterson," she introduced herself before Daniel James could speak. "Pleased to meet you." "Mitchell Patterson, that name sounds familiar. You wouldn't be the daughter of the late William Mitchell from Asheville?" Grace was surprised. "He was my father, yes, sir. Did you know him?" "I did, yes. An honorable man, a respected farmer. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Colonel Theodore studied Grace for a moment before continuing. "Your father was known to be very particular in raising his children. I heard you inherited his land." "I inherited part of it, yes, sir." "Interesting. And tell me, how did you meet our Daniel James?" The question was asked with a tone that suggested genuine interest, but Daniel James sensed the trap. Colonel Theodore was known for his ability to extract information from people. "We corresponded for a few months," Grace answered cautiously. "Matrimonial correspondence? How modern. And did it work out?" Daniel James intervened before Grace could answer. "We're getting to know each other better, Colonel. Of course, it's always good to know a person well before making important decisions." The man smiled again and said goodbye, but Daniel James knew the story would spread through town before the day was over. On the way back to the ranch, Grace was quiet, looking at the landscape without really seeing it. "Are you okay?" asked Daniel James. "I'm used to it," she replied without looking at him. "People always look at me that way." "I'm sorry about that." "You were looking at me that way too when I got off the wagon." Daniel James couldn't deny it. He had indeed been shocked and embarrassed. "That's true," he admitted, "but not because there's anything wrong with you. It was because you're different from what I expected, that's all. And now, do you still think there's something wrong with me?" Daniel James thought about the question for a few minutes before answering. "No, I don't think there's anything wrong. I think you're exactly as you described yourself in the letters, just smaller than I imagined." Grace smiled for the first time since they'd left town. "Thank you for being honest." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. When they arrived home, they found Mrs. Margaret talking on the porch with Mrs. Dorothy, a neighbor known for spreading gossip, faster than a wildfire in a drought. The woman looked at Grace with poorly concealed curiosity. "Good afternoon, Daniel James," she said, with an exaggerated smile. "This must be your visitor from Asheville." "Good afternoon, Mrs. Dorothy. This is Grace." "Nice to meet you, dear," said the woman, studying Grace from head to toe. "What a beautiful dress. Quality fabric." "Thank you," Grace replied politely. "And tell me, how did you two meet?" "Through correspondence," Grace said, keeping her answer brief. How interesting. Matrimonial correspondence. How modern, isn't it? Mrs. Margaret intervened with an impatient tone. Dorothy, didn't you say you were in a hurry to get home? Oh, yes, I really must go. It was a pleasure to meet you, Grace. I'm sure we'll see each other soon. After the neighbor left, Mrs. Margaret turned to her son. How was it in town? As you expected, Daniel James replied dryly. Everyone curious, everyone talking. And do you still plan to marry her? Grace, who had remained quiet during the exchange, spoke up. Mrs. Margaret, may I speak with you for a moment? Alone. Mrs. Margaret was surprised by the request, but motioned for Grace to follow her to the office. Daniel James stayed on the porch, worried about what the two women would say to each other. Inside the office, Grace stood before the dark wooden desk where Mrs. Margaret sat. Mrs. Margaret, I know you don't want me here, Grace began, and I perfectly understand the reasons. You understand? Of course. You raised a hard-working, honorable son, respected in the community. You want him to marry a woman who is a good match for the Harrison family, and I am not. Mrs. Margaret was taken aback by the frankness. It's not that you're not a good match, she began, trying to soften her words. Please, you don't need to be delicate with me. I know my appearance causes embarrassment. I know people will talk, they'll make jokes. I know it's easier to find a wife who doesn't bring problems. If you know all that, why do you insist on staying? Grace took a deep breath before answering. Because for 6 months, through the letters, I came to know a kind and honorable man who said he wanted a companion to share his dreams with, and I believed he meant it. But the letters didn't mention your condition. And would that have changed what was written? Would my feelings about life in the country be less sincere? Would my desire to have a family be less real? Would my love for the land be false? Mrs. Margaret fell silent, thinking about the question. I also read your son's letters, Mrs. Margaret. He wrote about loneliness, about wanting to find someone who understood his dreams. Does my height change any of his needs? People can be cruel, Mrs. Margaret said quietly. Yes, they are. But people also get used to things, and those who truly matter will judge us for who we are as people, not by our appearance. What if my son regrets it? What if he discovers he can't handle the stares, the comments? Then I will leave, without fights, without resentment, but he needs to have the chance to decide for himself, based on what he feels, not on the fear of others' judgment. Mrs. Margaret studied the young woman for long minutes. Grace didn't lower her eyes, keeping her gaze steady and dignified. You're stronger than I imagined, she said finally. I had to be. When you're born different, you learn early that you need to be twice as good as others to have the same opportunities. And do you think you can make my son happy? I don't know. But I know I can try with all my strength. I know I can be a good wife, a good homemaker, a good mother. I know I can work alongside him to make this ranch prosper. What if the townspeople don't accept you? Then we'll show we're worthy of respect through our work and our character. People might find it strange at first, but when they see we're a united and hard-working couple, they'll stop talking. When they left the office, Daniel James was pacing nervously on the porch. He looked anxiously at the two women, trying to decipher the outcome of the conversation from their faces. Daniel James, said Mrs. Margaret, I need to do some shopping in town tomorrow. Grace, would you like to join me? Grace looked surprised at her potential mother-in-law. It would be a pleasure, Mrs. Margaret. Daniel James understood that something had changed between the two, but didn't know exactly what. He spent the rest of the day observing his mother and Grace interacting more naturally, without the tension from previous days. During dinner, Mrs. Margaret asked some questions about the farm Grace had inherited in Asheville. She discovered the lands were smaller than St. Margaret's Ranch, but very well maintained and productive. You mentioned you sold the cattle, said Mrs. Margaret. Why? When Dad got sick, I couldn't take care of everything alone anymore. The cattle needed care I couldn't provide because of my height. I sold most of them and kept only some dairy cows and the chickens. Sensible. And what do you plan to do with the property now? Grace looked at Daniel James before answering. It depends on what happens here. If I stay, I might sell it or rent it out. If I return to Asheville, I'll manage it alone as before. Running a farm alone is very difficult, observed Daniel James. I know, but I've done it before, when Dad was very debilitated. It's hard, but not impossible. After dinner, Daniel James asked to speak with Grace alone. They walked to the back porch where they sat in wooden rocking chairs. The night was clear, with a full moon illuminating the fields around the house. "What did you and my mother talk about today?" he asked. "We talked about expectations," Grace answered, "about fears and about opportunities. Did you reach any conclusions?" "Your mother understood that I'm not a threat to his happiness, and I understood that she just wants to protect the son she loves." Daniel James rocked in his chair for a few minutes thinking. "Grace, I need to be honest with you about something." "What is it?" "When I saw you getting off the carriage, my first impulse was to make up an excuse and send you away immediately." Grace didn't show surprise. "I imagined it would be like that. But then you started talking, showing who you are, and I kept remembering the letters, the woman I learned to admire over the past months. And now? What do you feel?" Daniel James stopped rocking and looked directly at her. "I feel I still need time. I don't want to make a hasty decision that could hurt us both. Can you stay a few more days so we can get to know each other better?" "Yes, I can. But Daniel James, I need to know one thing." "What?" "Are you trying to convince yourself to like me out of obligation? Because if that's the case, it's better to stop now. I don't want to be accepted as an act of charity." The question was direct and painful. Daniel James needed to think before answering. "It's not charity," he said finally. "It's curiosity. I want to understand if it's possible to overcome the first impression and discover if there's something real between us. And if you discover there isn't, then I'll be honest, and you'll be free to find someone who deserves you. And if you discover there is, then we'll get married and build a life together, no matter what anyone thinks." Grace smiled in the dark. "That's all I can ask for. An honest chance." In the following days, a routine settled in at St. Margaret's Ranch. Grace woke up early to help with household chores and then accompanied Daniel James in the fieldwork. She demonstrated practical knowledge that surprised even the ranch employees. Samuel, the foreman who had worked there for 20 years, was initially skeptical about the little lady's presence, but when she suggested a solution to a drainage problem he had been trying to solve for months, his opinion changed completely. "Mrs. Grace has a good eye for the land," he commented to Daniel James. "She sees things we don't notice." Each day, Daniel James discovered new aspects of Grace's personality. She had a sharp sense of humor, knew how to tell engaging stories, and possessed admirable determination. When she faced difficulties because of her height, like reaching high objects or climbing steep places, she found creative solutions without complaining. Mrs. Margaret also gradually changed her opinion. She observed how Grace cared for the house with dedication, how she prepared tasty meals with simple ingredients, and how she treated the employees with respect and kindness. "She has a good heart," she admitted to her son one evening, "and a head for business too." By the end of the first week, Daniel James realized he looked at Grace differently. He no longer first noticed her height, but rather her intelligent eyes, sincere smile, and dignified posture. He began to understand why he had corresponded with her for months. Her essence shone through in every gesture. The real test came when Colonel Theodore appeared at the ranch for an unexpected visit. He arrived at lunchtime and was invited to the table, where he found Grace serving the meal like an experienced homemaker. "How are you, Grace?" he asked with studied politeness. "Very well, thank you. How is your family?" "All well, thank God. And you? Are you adapting to our region?" "Yes, I am. It's a generous land for those who know how to work it." During the meal, Colonel Theodore asked several questions about Grace's property in Asheville. She answered all of them accurately, demonstrating detailed knowledge about land values, agricultural production, and the regional market. "Interesting," he said. "You really understand the business. I learned from my father since I was little. And tell me something." The colonel leaned forward. "Do you plan to sell your lands in Asheville?" "I haven't decided yet. It depends on some factors." "What factors?" Grace looked at Daniel James before answering. It depends on where I'll establish my family. Ah, I see. And if you sell, what do you plan to invest the money in? In expanding the property where I live. Well-maintained land always appreciates. Colonel Theodore nodded, impressed with the sensible response. After the visitor left, Daniel James remarked, "He was more respectful today than at the fair." "Because now he knows I have possessions," Grace replied pragmatically. "Money makes people change their minds about many things. Doesn't that bother you?" "It's reality. I'll accept respect for whatever reasons he has, at least at first. Later, with time, people learn to respect for the right reasons." That evening, Daniel James kept thinking about Grace's practical wisdom. She understood the world in a way he admired, without illusions, but also without bitterness. The following Sunday came the moment of the hardest test, church. Mrs. Margaret suggested they all go to Sunday Mass in town, as they always did. Grace accepted without hesitation, though she knew she would be watched by the entire community. She dressed in her best dress, navy blue silk with white lace details, and pinned her hair in an elegant bun. When she came down the stairs, Daniel James was impressed by the transformation. Grace was truly beautiful, radiating dignity and confidence. At church, eyes turned toward them as soon as they entered. Grace kept her head high, greeting acquaintances with a polite smile. When they knelt for prayer, she showed she knew the rituals well, participating in the Mass with genuine devotion. During the priest's sermon about acceptance and loving thy neighbor, Daniel James couldn't help but notice the irony of the moment. Here was a congregation listening to Christian kindness while whispering about a woman whose only difference was her height. After Mass, as they left the church, several people approached to greet the trio. Most were polite, some showed genuine curiosity about Grace, and a few were clearly insincere. Mrs. Eleanor, an elderly lady respected in the community, surprised everyone by striking up a conversation with Grace about medicinal plants. She discovered that Grace knew old recipes and natural treatments, and the two launched into an animated discussion about the benefits of Boldo tea and the properties of rosemary. "Did you learn this from your grandmother?" asked Mrs. Eleanor. "Yes, ma'am. She always said that God's pharmacy grows in the backyard." "What wisdom! I would very much like to exchange some recipes with you." "It would be a pleasure, Mrs. Eleanor." Daniel James watched the scene with satisfaction. Grace was winning the respect of the right people, those who valued knowledge and character over appearance, but not everything was positive. On the way home, they were caught up by Joe Benjamin, a man known for his sharp tongue and the pleasure he took in humiliating others. "Hey, Daniel James," he said with a malicious smile, "have you set the wedding date yet?" "We're still deciding," Daniel James replied cautiously. "Yeah, I imagine it's a tough decision. It's not every day a man has to choose between love and, well, certain social conventions." Grace remained silent, but Daniel James felt anger rising in his chest. "What do you mean, Joe Benjamin?" "Oh, nothing much. I just find it interesting how love sometimes makes us accept certain limitations." "What limitations?" "Come on, Daniel James. You know what I'm talking about. The young lady seems like a very good person, but let's face it, it's going to be hard for your children, isn't it? Children can be cruel to those who are different." Grace, who had been quiet until then, spoke up in a firm voice. "Mr. Joe Benjamin, do you have children?" "I have 3. "And are they happy?" "Yes, they are." "And what do you teach them about treating people with respect?" Joe Benjamin was speechless for a moment. Teaching that they should be educated with everyone. So I'm sure they'll treat my children with the same courtesy you're showing me now." The intelligent and dignified response left the man embarrassed. He muttered an apology and walked away, visibly defeated in his attempt to humiliate her. "Serves him right," said Mrs. Margaret when he moved away. "Joe Benjamin has always been a small-minded man." That evening, Daniel James asked to speak with Grace in the garden. They walked among the fruit trees, listening to the sound of crickets and smelling the scent of night flowers. "Grace," he began, "today at church I was watching you and noticed something." "What?" "That you're exactly the woman I came to know through the letters. The physical appearance is just a detail." Grace stopped walking and looked at him. "What are you trying to say?" Daniel James took a deep breath before continuing. I'm saying I'd like to ask for your hand in marriage. Officially. Why? Because I admire your intelligence, your courage, your kindness. Because you make me want to be a better man. Because I imagine our life together and see happiness. And what about people's comments, and the looks, and the difficulties we'll face? We'll face them together. And if anyone wants to speak ill, let them. I won't let others' ignorance decide my happiness. Grace remained silent for several minutes, looking at the stars. Daniel James, I also fell in love with you through the letters. And in these days here, I've come to admire the man you are. But I need to be sure you're not doing this out of pity or obligation. How can I prove that's not the case? By kissing me. The simple and direct answer took him by surprise. They stood facing each other, sizing each other up with their gaze. Daniel James slowly leaned down and touched Grace's lips tenderly. The kiss was gentle, hesitant at first, but then became deeper and more sincere. When they separated, both were breathing differently. So, she asked, did you feel pity, or did you feel love? I felt that I want to kiss you again, every day for the rest of my life. Grace smiled and moved closer to him. Then yes, I accept marrying you. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The engagement was announced the following Sunday at church, causing a mix of reactions in the community. Some people showed sincere approval, others were surprised but respectful, and a few showed clear disapproval. Mrs. Eleanor was one of the first to congratulate the couple, followed by other ladies who had been impressed with Grace's knowledge of natural medicine and agriculture. When will the wedding be? She asked. In 2 months, replied Daniel James. We want a simple ceremony right here at the church. And will you live at St. Margaret's Ranch afterward? Yes, we will. Grace will sell her land in Asheville and invest in expanding our property. The news that the bride was bringing money to the marriage changed many people's attitudes. Even those who had reservations about the union began to view it more positively when they learned she would contribute financially to the family's prosperity. The wedding preparations began immediately. Grace decided to make her own dress, demonstrating sewing skills that impressed Mrs. Margaret. She chose a cream satin fabric with pearl details, creating an elegant yet simple design. Where did you learn to sew like this? Asked Mrs. Margaret, admiring the work. My grandmother was a dressmaker before she got married. She taught me that a woman should know how to create her own elegance. During the weeks leading up to the wedding, Daniel James and Grace spent more time together, getting to know each other better and planning their future. They discovered they shared similar views on how to run the ranch and raise a family. Grace suggested some changes in the property's organization that could increase productivity. She wanted to create a larger medicinal garden and perhaps start producing cheeses and sweets to sell in the city. You have a head for business, Daniel James observed. At my dad's ranch, I handled everything involving money. He said women are more careful with pennies, and pennies taken care of turn into coins. A month before the wedding, an unexpected letter arrived from Asheville. It was from Grace's sister, Victoria, saying she would come for the wedding and bringing disturbing news. What does she say? Asked Daniel James, seeing Grace's worried expression. She says my cousin Benjamin is contesting the inheritance Dad left me. He claims I'm not capable of managing the lands because of my condition. Can he do that? He can try. If he can prove I'm unfit to manage the property, the will could be voided. Daniel James felt indignation growing in his chest. That's absurd. You're more capable than most men I know. But the law doesn't see it that way. A woman with dwarfism can be considered incapacitated by the judge if there are questions about her fitness. What are we going to do? We need witnesses who can prove my capability. And maybe it's better to sell the lands quickly, before he can block the sale. The situation created an unexpected urgency. Grace decided to postpone the wedding for a few weeks to resolve the inheritance issue first. She didn't want Daniel James to get involved in a legal battle right after the wedding. You don't need to postpone, he said. We'll face this together. No, Daniel James. If we marry before resolving this, you'll be affected too. It's better I handle it alone, and then we can get back to our wedding plans." Grace's decision showed another facet of her character. She didn't want to drag her fiancé into her personal problems, but Daniel James had already decided that her problems were his problems too. Victoria arrived the following week, revealing herself to be a tall and elegant woman, but visibly embarrassed about her sister's situation. The reunion of the two was cordial, but tense. "Grace, I'm so sorry about all this," said Victoria. "Benjamin is saying Dad wasn't of sound mind when he made the will, and you believe that?" "Of course not. Dad was lucid until the end, but Benjamin hired a lawyer and is making a lot of noise." "Why does he want the lands? He already has his own ranch." "He has gambling debts. He needs money urgently and thought it would be easy to take your lands by claiming incapacity." Daniel James, who was listening to the conversation, spoke up. "What kind of evidence is he using?" "Witnesses who say Grace couldn't handle large animals, that she had difficulties managing the ranch," Victoria replied. "That's a lie," Daniel James exploded. "She's shown impressive knowledge here at our ranch." "I know, but the witnesses are being paid to say otherwise." The situation was more serious than they had imagined. Benjamin wasn't just contesting the will, he was creating false evidence of incapacity to support his claim. "We need a lawyer," said Grace. "I've already thought of that," said Victoria. "I know a good lawyer in Asheville, Dr. Augustus Carter. He's handled similar cases. And how much will it cost? He said he'd accept a portion of the lands as payment if we win the case." Grace thought for a moment before answering. "All right. I'm going back to Asheville to settle this." "I'm coming with you," Daniel James said immediately. "You don't have to." "Yes, I am. We're engaged. We'll face this together." His determination touched Grace's heart. For the first time, she had someone willing to fight by her side. 2 days later, Daniel James, Grace, and Victoria set off for Asheville in a rented wagon. The journey took 2 days, with a stop to sleep at a roadside inn. During the trip, Daniel James learned more about Grace's family history. Her father had indeed been a prosperous and respected rancher, known for his honesty and fair treatment of employees. Her mother had died when Grace was still a child, and he had raised her with her grandmother's help. "Dad never treated me like I was incapable of anything," Grace shared. "Since I was little, he taught me everything about the ranch. He said size had nothing to do with intelligence." "And what was your relationship with Benjamin like?" "Always tense. He expected to inherit everything when Dad died, since I'm a woman and different. He was furious when he learned the terms of the will." "What exactly did your father leave you?" "The main house, half of the cultivable land, and all the remaining cattle. Benjamin got the other half of the land and the farming equipment." "That seems like a fair division." It was fair, but Benjamin thought he deserved everything. When they arrived in Asheville, Daniel James was impressed with Grace's property. Smaller than St. Margaret's Ranch, but very well organized and productive. The house was cozy and well maintained, surrounded by gardens that showed the care of its former resident. Dr. Augustus Carter was a middle-aged man with graying hair and elegant manners. He received the group in his office and listened carefully to the whole situation. "The case isn't simple," he said after analyzing the documents. "Benjamin is claiming that your father was being manipulated by you, that you took advantage of his condition to influence the will." "That's a lie," said Grace. "Dad was lucid and made this decision consciously." "I believe you, but we need evidence, and Benjamin has witnesses willing to testify against you." "What kind of witnesses?" "Former employees he bribed, neighbors he made deals with. They'll say you couldn't manage the ranch properly." Daniel James leaned forward. "What if we get witnesses who can attest that she's perfectly capable? I can vouch for her competence myself." "That would help, but you're an interested party. We need neutral witnesses respected in the community." The situation seemed complicated, but Dr. Augustus had a strategy. "I'll request a hearing with the judge so he can meet Grace in person. If she demonstrates competence in front of him, it will be hard to sustain the claim of incapacity." "And how long could that take?" "A few weeks, maybe months. Inheritance cases tend to be lengthy." The prospect of a long battle worried Grace. She didn't want to keep Daniel James waiting indefinitely, nor did she want the situation to affect his reputation. That night, staying at Victoria's house, Grace talked to Daniel James about her concerns. "Maybe it's better for you to go back to your ranch," she said. "This could take months, and it's not fair to you." "I already said we'll face this together," he replied firmly. "I'm not abandoning you now. But what about St. Margaret's Ranch and your mother? They can't be left unattended. Samuel can take care of everything for a few months, and my mother understands the situation." His loyalty strengthened Grace's love even more. She realized she had found not just a husband, but a true life partner. The following weeks were intense work. Dr. Augustus collected testimonies from people who knew Grace and could attest to her competence. The town priest, the doctor who cared for the family, and some local merchants agreed to testify on her behalf. Meanwhile, Daniel James became more familiar with the property and suggested some improvements that could be implemented. His experience with cattle complemented Grace's knowledge of agriculture, and together they developed plans to modernize the ranch. "If we keep both properties," he said one evening, "we can specialize each in different products. Your land here is excellent for coffee, while ours is better for cattle." "You mean we don't need to sell here?" "Only if you want to. With both ranches working together, we could build a very prosperous business." The idea excited Grace. She hadn't considered the possibility of keeping her father's inheritance and still having St. Margaret's Ranch. The hearing with the judge was scheduled for a Thursday in October. Dr. Augustus prepared Grace carefully, explaining what kind of questions she might face and how she should respond. "The important thing is to demonstrate knowledge and confidence," he said. "Show that you understand business, that you know how to manage money, and that you have good judgment." On the day of the hearing, Grace dressed in her best outfit and styled her hair elegantly. Daniel James wore his only suit and accompanied her to the courthouse. The judge was an elderly but sharp man, known for his impartiality. Benjamin was present with his lawyer, a young and arrogant man who clearly underestimated Grace's ability. "Miss Patterson," the judge began, "I'd like you to explain how you managed your father's ranch." Grace answered clearly and in detail, explaining crop rotation, cattle management, expense control, and production planning. The judge asked several specific questions, and she answered all without hesitation. "And about the property's finances, how did you control the accounts?" "I kept a detailed record book, Your Honor. I noted all expenses and income, did monthly balances and planned investments in advance." Benjamin's lawyer tried to intimidate her with aggressive questions about her physical ability for certain tasks, but Grace remained calm and explained how she adapted tasks to her physical limitations without compromising efficiency. "Managing a ranch doesn't depend on physical strength, but on intelligence and knowledge," she said. "My father taught me that a good manager organizes work so that everyone contributes with their best skills." Benjamin's witnesses were questioned severely by Dr. Augustus, who managed to show that many of their claims were contradictory or motivated by suspicious payments. Finally, Grace's witnesses testified about her competence and integrity. The priest told how she managed the sale of part of the cattle after her father's death, obtaining fair prices and paying all debts. The doctor attested that she always demonstrated lucidity and judgment during consultations about her father's health. At the end of the hearing, the judge withdrew to deliberate. The wait was distressing, but 2 hours later he returned with the decision. After hearing all parties and analyzing the evidence, he said, "I find no basis for the claim of Miss Patterson's incapacity. On the contrary, she demonstrated above-average knowledge, maturity, and administrative competence. The will of William Mitchell Patterson is valid and must be fully executed." Grace felt her legs go weak with relief. Daniel James held her arm, smiling happily. Benjamin left the courthouse visibly upset, but with no choice but to accept the decision. Dr. Augustus approached the couple with a satisfied expression. "Congratulations, Grace. You were perfect. The judge was impressed with your knowledge. Thank you for everything, Dr. Augustus. Without your help, I wouldn't have succeeded. What do you plan to do now?" Grace looked at Daniel James before answering. "We're getting married, and we'll manage both ranches together. Dad would be proud to know his life's work will continue to thrive." With the inheritance matter resolved, they returned to St. Margaret's Ranch to resume the wedding preparations. Mrs. Margaret had taken care of everything in their absence, showing that her approval of the union was now genuine. "I was worried about you," she said as she welcomed them. "How did everything go?" "Grace proved she's more competent than the greedy cousin," Daniel James replied proudly. "The judge ruled in her favor." "That's wonderful. And now can we get back to the wedding preparations?" "Yes, we can," said Grace. "If you still want me as part of the family." "We certainly do, my dear. And you can call me Mom Margaret from now on." The mother-in-law's affectionate gesture moved Grace to tears. Finally, she had a complete family again. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in November, when the weather was cooler and the garden flowers were at their peak beauty. Grace finished her wedding dress, creating an elegant piece that skillfully disguised her short stature. On the wedding morning, several women from the neighborhood came to help with the preparations. Mrs. Eleanor brought flowers from her own garden to decorate the church, and other neighbors contributed sweets and savory treats for the reception. "You look beautiful," said Victoria, helping her sister with the veil. "Dad would be proud." "Do you think so?" "I'm sure. He always said you'd find someone who saw your true worth." When it was time to go to the church, Grace discovered a surprise that Daniel James had prepared. Instead of the ordinary wagon, he had decorated a special carriage with white flowers and ribbons. "For my queen," he said, offering his hand to help her up. The church was full of people from the community, many of whom had changed their minds about the couple after getting to know Grace better. Even those who were initially critical now showed respect for the bride's dignity and competence. The priest gave a beautiful sermon about love that overcomes differences and the importance of judging people by character, not appearance. When it came time for the vows, Daniel James and Grace looked into each other's eyes and promised love, respect, and companionship for life. "Daniel James Harrison, do you take Grace Mitchell Patterson to be your lawful wife, to love and respect her in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." "Grace Mitchell Patterson, do you take Daniel James Harrison to be your lawful husband, to love and respect him in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." When the priest declared them husband and wife, the church echoed with sincere applause. The kiss sealed not only their union, but also the community's acceptance. The celebration at St. Margaret's Ranch was simple but joyful. The guests praised the food prepared mainly by Grace and Mrs. Margaret, and several men asked Daniel James about the secrets to finding such an accomplished wife. "The secret," he replied, "was having the patience to know the whole person, not just the appearance." During the celebration, Colonel Theodore approached the couple to congratulate them. "Congratulations, Daniel James. You made an excellent choice." "Thank you, Colonel." "And you, Grace, do you really intend to manage 2 ranches?" "Yes, sir. With my husband's help, of course." "Interesting. If you ever need any advice or support, you can count on me." The change in attitude from the region's most influential man was noticed by everyone present. If Colonel Theodore approved of the marriage, it meant the couple had his social blessing. When the party ended and the guests departed, Daniel James and Grace were alone on the porch watching the stars. "How do you feel, Mrs. Harrison?" he asked. "Complete," she replied. "For the first time in my life, I feel I can be exactly who I am without fear of judgment. And I feel lucky. Very lucky." They stayed silent for a few minutes, listening to the nighttime sounds of the ranch that was now theirs. "Daniel James, may I make a confession?" "Of course." "When I stepped off that wagon and saw your face, I knew you were shocked. In that moment, I thought about making up an excuse and leaving immediately. Why didn't you do it?" "Because I remembered your letters. You wrote about wanting to find someone who understood your dreams, who wanted to build a simple but fulfilling life in the countryside, and I thought, if he truly feels that way, maybe he can see beyond my appearance. And you were right." "It took a while," she said with a smile. "But I was right." Daniel James laughed and kissed her gently. "Do you know what else amazes me about you?" "What?" "Your courage. You faced all the prejudices, all the difficulties, and never lost your dignity. I learned from my father that dignity is the only thing no one can take from you unless you allow it. Wise advice. And you, Daniel James, do you regret anything? What would I regret? Marrying a woman who will make people stare and comment for the rest of their lives. Daniel James stopped rocking in his chair and looked seriously at her. Grace, may I be frank? Please. At first I was afraid of the comments. I was ashamed to imagine what they would say. But do you know when that changed? When? When I realized that the only people who truly matter are those who respect us for who we are. The others, those who only know how to judge by appearance, don't deserve our attention. And you don't miss their approval? No, I prefer the approval of my conscience and my wife. Grace moved closer to him in the chair. So we won't have problems when the difficult times come, because they will come. We'll face them together, as we did with the inheritance issue. We're a team now. A team, she repeated, liking the word. Yes, we're a team. In the following months, the couple's life settled into a productive and happy routine. Grace divided her time between the two ranches, implementing improvements that significantly increased the productivity of both. At St. Margaret's Ranch, she created a medicinal garden that soon became famous in the region. People came from neighboring towns to get her natural remedies and advice on healing plants. What started as a personal project turned into an additional source of income. In Asheville, she introduced new coffee farming techniques she had learned from Daniel James, and the results were impressive. The quality of the beans improved so much that they secured contracts with buyers from larger cities. "You're a business genius," said Daniel James during one of his visits to the Asheville property. "I'm no genius at all. I just use the knowledge I have and always seek to learn more." That's exactly what makes you special. Their relationship deepened over time. They discovered their differences complemented each other perfectly. Where one was more cautious, the other was bolder. Where one had physical limitations, the other compensated with strength. Where one had less experience, the other taught with patience. Mrs. Margaret, who had initially resisted the marriage, became one of her daughter-in-law's greatest defenders. She would tell anyone who would listen how Grace had modernized the ranch and increased the family's profits. "My son was lucky to find a woman like that," she said with pride. "Smart, hard-working, and kind-hearted." 1 year after the wedding, Grace discovered she was pregnant. The news brought immense joy to the couple and to Mrs. Margaret, but it also reignited some malicious comments in the community. "Let's see how the children will turn out," murmured Joe Benjamin to some acquaintances at the market. When the comments reached Grace's ears, she showed no concern. "People will always talk," she said to Daniel James. "What matters is that our child will grow up surrounded by love and respect. And if she's born with dwarfism like you, then we'll teach her to be strong and proud of who she is, like my father taught me. And if she's born with average height, then we'll teach her to respect all people, regardless of differences." The pregnancy proceeded without problems. Dr. Carter, the local doctor, carefully monitored the progress and assured that everything was normal. "There's no reason to worry," he said after an examination. "You are perfectly healthy and the baby is developing normally." During the waiting months, Daniel James became even more protective and affectionate with his wife. He took on heavier tasks on the ranch so she could rest and made sure to accompany her to all medical appointments. "You don't have to treat me like I'm made of porcelain," she said, when he insisted on carrying a light basket. "I know you're strong. I just want to take care of you and our baby." His dedication moved her. Grace realized she had found not just a husband, but a true partner who loved and respected her completely. One March afternoon, while tending the medicinal garden, Grace felt the first contractions. Daniel James was in the pasture with the cattle, but Samuel ran to get him when she asked for help. "It's time!" shouted Daniel James when he arrived home and found his wife leaning on the kitchen table. Mrs. Margaret, who had assisted in several births on the ranch over the years, took charge of the situation calmly and efficiently. "Let's take her to the room and call the midwife," she said. "And you, Daniel James, stay calm. Everything will be fine." The midwife, Mrs. Martha, arrived an hour later and confirmed that the birth was progressing normally. "Is this your first?" she asked Grace. "Yes, it is." "Then it might take a bit longer, but it's all right. The baby is in the correct position." The following hours were long and painful, but Grace faced it all with the same courage she had shown in every other difficult situation in life. Daniel James remained by her side, holding her hand and offering words of encouragement. When the baby was finally born in the middle of the night on a Thursday, the first sound was a strong, healthy cry that echoed through the house. "It's a girl," announced Mrs. Martha with a broad smile. "Beautiful and perfect." Daniel James looked at his newborn daughter and felt his heart overflowing with love. The girl had her mother's dark eyes and the same determined expression. "What shall we name her?" he asked Grace. "How about Joy?" she suggested, still breathless from the effort, to remind us that she brought complete joy to our family. "Joy Harrison," said Daniel James, testing the name. "Perfect." When Mrs. Martha handed the baby to Grace, she immediately noticed that her daughter had normal proportions. "She'll grow up tall like her father," observed the midwife. "It doesn't matter," said Grace, kissing her daughter's forehead. "What matters is that she's healthy and happy." Mrs. Margaret entered the room a few hours later to meet her granddaughter and was delighted with the child. "She's beautiful," she said with tears in her eyes. "She'll be a strong girl like her mother." "And smart like her grandmother," added Daniel James, making Mrs. Margaret smile with pride. The first weeks with the baby were a time of adjustment and discovery. Grace showed a natural maternal instinct, caring for her daughter with affection and competence. Daniel James proved to be a dedicated father, waking up during the night to help with feedings and diaper changes. "You're a better father than I expected," said Grace one early morning as he rocked their daughter. "Why didn't you expect it?" "Because many men think taking care of a baby is women's work. Our daughter is both our responsibility. I want to be part of every moment of her life." Daniel James's dedication impressed the other women in the community, who commented on Grace's luck in having such a present husband. When Joy turned 3 months old, the couple decided to baptize her at the town church. The ceremony was simple but moving, with Mrs. Margaret and Colonel Theodore as godparents. "May God bless this child and protect her always," said the priest during the ceremony. "Amen," the congregation replied in unison. After the baptism, several people came up to greet the family and meet the baby. Even those who had initially criticized the marriage now showed genuine affection for the child. "She's beautiful," commented one lady. "She has her mother's intelligent eyes." "And her father's gentle smile," added another. Back at the ranch, during the baptism celebration, Colonel Theodore pulled Daniel James aside for a private conversation. "Daniel James, I have a proposal for you." "What proposal?" "I'm organizing a cooperative of local rural producers. We want to improve the prices we get for our products and have more bargaining power with buyers from big cities." "Interesting. And what does that have to do with me?" "I'd like you and Grace to participate. You have a modern vision for business and could contribute a lot." The proposal surprised Daniel James. Being invited to a cooperative led by the most influential man in the region was a clear sign of acceptance and respect. "I need to talk with my wife," he said. "Of course, but don't take too long to decide. We want to start by the next harvest." That night, after the guests had left, Daniel James told Grace about the Colonel's proposal. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it's an excellent opportunity. A cooperative could really improve the situation for all producers." "Would you like to participate?" "Very much. I've always thought that small producers need to unite to have strength. So shall we accept?" "Let's, but on one condition." "What?" "I want to propose that the cooperative also include the women who produce sweets, cheeses, and homemade remedies. They also need support to sell their products." Grace's suggestion once again showed her broad business vision and her concern for the community. "Excellent idea," said Daniel James. "I'll suggest it to the Colonel." Participation in the cooperative marked a new chapter in the couple's life. Grace became the first woman to actively participate in business meetings, bringing innovative suggestions that impressed the other members. Her proposal to include the homemaker producers was accepted and implemented, creating a support network that benefited dozens of families in the region. Soon, the cooperative's products gained a reputation for quality and began to be sold in distant cities. "You've transformed our cooperative," said Colonel Theodore at one of the meetings. "Mrs. Grace's ideas have increased our profits by 30%. "It's the result of everyone's work," Grace replied modestly, "but the best innovations came from you. Who would have thought of selling our products as traditional handmade goods in big cities?" Grace's marketing strategy had been simple but effective. Instead of competing with mass-produced items, she suggested positioning their products as artisanal and traditional, emphasizing quality and handcrafted care. The cooperative's success brought prosperity to the entire region. The farms grew, new jobs were created, and families' quality of life improved significantly. Daniel James and Grace became known as a hard-working and prosperous couple. Their story of overcoming prejudice and building a happy life inspired others to question their own biases. When Joy turned 2, she was a healthy, smart, and affectionate child. She spoke early and showed curiosity about everything around her. Grace often took her to both farms, teaching her about plants and animals. "Is she going to be a farmer like her parents?" joked Mrs. Margaret. "She'll be whatever she wants," Grace replied. "But we'll teach her everything we know so she has options." Their daughter's education was a priority for the couple. They hired a private tutor to teach her first letters and numbers, and Daniel James built a small but well-curated library in their home. "Education is the most valuable inheritance we can leave her," Grace would say. One day, while Joy was playing in the garden, she asked a question that deeply touched her mother's heart. "Mommy, why are you small?" Grace knelt to her daughter's level to answer. "God made people in different sizes, my love. Some are tall, others are short, some are thin, others are heavy. Everyone is special in their own way." "And is that bad?" "No, my daughter. It's neither bad nor good. It's just different. What matters is how we treat people, not how they look on the outside. I like you, Tiny," the girl said, hugging her mother. "And I like you just the way you are." The child's simplicity and the natural way she accepted her mother's differences reinforced Grace's belief that prejudice is learned, not innate. That same year, news arrived that would change the family's life once again. Benjamin, Grace's cousin, who had contested the inheritance, showed up at St. Margaret's Ranch asking to speak with her. "What does he want?" asked Daniel James, suspicious. "I don't know, but I'll hear what he has to say." Benjamin was visibly embarrassed and had lost weight. His clothes, once elegant, now looked worn. "Grace, I've come to apologize," he said, removing his hat. "Apologize for what?" "For everything. For contesting the will, for paying false witnesses, for trying to steal your inheritance." "And why are you apologizing now?" Benjamin hesitated before answering. "Because I lost everything gambling. The farm, the cattle, even the house. And now I understand that my uncle was right to leave the land to you. You knew how to make what he built prosper, while I destroyed everything I inherited." Grace looked at her cousin with a mix of pity and disappointment. "What do you want from me, Benjamin?" "I'm leaving for Chicago. I'm going to try to work in a factory. But first, I wanted to ask for forgiveness and maybe a little help to start over." Daniel James approached his wife, ready to defend her if necessary, but Grace remained calm. "What kind of help?" "A little money for the trip and to get settled there. I promise I'll pay it all back when I get a job." It was a delicate situation. Benjamin had tried to destroy her, but now he was visibly remorseful and desperate. "Can I discuss this with my husband?" she asked. "Of course. I'll wait in town for a few days." After Benjamin left, Daniel James expressed his opinion bluntly. "He doesn't deserve our help, Grace. He tried to steal your inheritance. I know, but I also know what it feels like to be desperate and alone. If it were just me, maybe I'd ignore it. But I have you, I have our daughter, I have a prosperous life. Maybe we can help without harming ourselves. Do you really want to help someone who tried to hurt you? I don't want to help because he deserves it. I want to help because it's the right thing to do. Dad always said that true prosperity only comes when we extend a hand to those in need." Grace's generosity impressed Daniel James once again. Even after everything she had been through, she held no grudges. "How much do you want to give him?" "Enough for the trip and to get settled. Not too much because he needs to learn to stand on his own." In the end, They decided to give Benjamin the equivalent of 2 months' wages for a worker, enough to start over, but not so much that he would become complacent. When they handed over the money, Benjamin cried with emotion and gratitude. "Grace, I don't deserve your kindness." "No one deserves or doesn't deserve kindness, Benjamin. Kindness is a gift we give because we want to, not because the person deserves it. I promise I'll pay it all back. If you can, great. If you can't, that's fine too. I just ask that you use this opportunity to become a better man." Years later, Benjamin sent a letter from Chicago saying he had gotten a job in a factory, married an honest woman, and was building a decent life. Along with the letter, he sent the money he had borrowed, plus an extra amount, as thanks. "You were right," said Daniel James when they read the letter. "Sometimes people just need an opportunity to change. Everyone deserves a second chance. My father taught me that." Over the years, the Harrison family became one of the most respected and prosperous in the region. Grace had 2 more children, a boy named William in honor of his grandfather, and another girl named Margaret in honor of her grandmother. William was born with dwarfism like his mother, but he grew up strong and confident, raised to be proud of who he was. Margaret was of normal height like her father and older sister. The 3 children grew up in an environment of love, respect, and hard work. They learned from an early age that differences between people should be celebrated, not criticized. "Why is my brother small like Mommy?" Margaret asked when she was little. "Because God makes each person special in their own way," explained Joy, repeating what she had learned from her mother. "William is small, but he's very smart and brave." The natural way the children accepted physical differences became an example for the entire community. Other families began to educate their children with the same values of tolerance and respect. Grace became a leader in the community, organizing social and educational projects. She created a rural school to teach underprivileged children to read and write, and a training center for women to learn trades that would give them financial independence. "Education transforms lives," she always said. "An educated person can overcome any obstacle." Daniel James supported all of his wife's projects and often told his friends how lucky he had been. "If I had rejected Grace because of her appearance," he said, "I would have missed the best thing that ever happened to me." The couple's story spread beyond the region's borders. Journalists from big cities came to interview them about their story of overcoming and love. A writer even proposed writing a book about them, but they refused. "Our story is simple," said Grace. "There's nothing extraordinary about loving and respecting people for who they are." "But your story could inspire others," insisted the writer. "If it can inspire, I'm happy. But you don't need a book for that. People can learn from everyday examples." When Grace turned 40, the family organized a party at the ranch to celebrate. Hundreds of people attended: neighbors, friends, cooperative employees, families helped by the social projects. During the party, Colonel Theodore gave an emotional speech. 20 years ago, when Grace arrived in our community, some of us received her with prejudice and distrust. Today, we recognize that she has become one of the most important people in this region. Through hard work, dedication, and kindness, she has taught us that the size of one's heart is far more important than the size of one's body. The applause was long and sincere. Grace thanked everyone with tears in her eyes, surrounded by her husband and 3 children. "Thank you to everyone who gave me the opportunity to show who I am inside," she said. "And thank you especially to my husband, who had the courage to look beyond first impressions." That evening, when the party ended and the children were asleep, Daniel James and Grace were alone on the porch, as they had been for so many years. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. "Just one thing," she replied. "What?" "Not having come here sooner. We lost some years we could have lived together." Daniel James laughed and kissed her gently. "We arrived at the right time. If it had been earlier, I might not have been ready to recognize your worth. And are you ready now? Now I know that you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and that our story proves that true love overcomes any prejudice." Grace moved closer to him in the rocking chair. "Do you know what I'm most proud of in our story?" "What?" "That our children are growing up without prejudices. They will make the world a better place. How can you be sure of that? Because yesterday I saw Joy defending a child who was being teased at school for being different. She told the boys who were teasing, "God made each person special in their own way, and you have no right to be mean to anyone." Daniel James smiled, proud of his daughter. She learned from her mother. She learned from both of us. And William is also becoming a strong and confident boy. He knows that size doesn't define a person's worth. And Margaret? Margaret is learning that having privileges, like normal height, means having a responsibility to help those who are less privileged. The education they gave their children reflected the values they had built together over the years. More than teaching academic subjects, they taught character, empathy, and respect. When Mrs. Margaret turned 80, she gathered the family for a serious conversation. "I want to talk about the future of the ranch," she said. "You don't need to worry about that now, Mom," said Daniel James. "Yes, I do. I want to have everything well organized." She had decided to leave the entire property to Daniel James and Grace, with one special condition. "I want part of the land to be dedicated to social projects. Grace transformed our community, and that transformation needs to continue." Her mother-in-law's generosity moved Grace. Over the years, Mrs. Margaret had become not just a mother-in-law, but a true mother to her. "Mrs. Margaret, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is, my daughter. You brought prosperity and kindness to our family. It's only fair that you have the resources to continue doing good." With the inheritance secured, Grace was able to expand her social projects. She created a rural technical school that taught modern agriculture to young people in the region, a small but well-equipped hospital to handle emergencies, and a microcredit program for women entrepreneurs. "You're changing the lives of hundreds of families," observed Daniel James. "We're changing. None of this would be possible without your support. But the ideas are yours. The vision is yours. The courage to implement all of this comes from the love and trust you give me every day." Their partnership had grown stronger over time. Daniel James took care more of the operational aspects of the ranches, while Grace dedicated herself to social projects and innovation in the business. When Joy turned 18, she decided to study medicine in the capital. She wanted to return to work at the hospital her mother had created. "I want to help people like you do, Mum," she said. "Then go and study hard. But always remember where you came from and where you want to return." William, at 16, showed talent for engineering and dreamed of modernizing the region's agricultural techniques even further. "I'll create machines that allow people like me to work on equal footing with anyone," he said. Margaret, the youngest, wanted to be a teacher and continue her mother's educational work. "Education is the seed of all other transformations," she said, repeating a phrase she had heard from her mother since she was little. The three children had grown up with purpose and determination, inspired by their parents' example that it's possible to overcome any obstacle with hard work, intelligence, and kindness. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Daniel James prepared a surprise for Grace. He took her back to the gate where they had first met, now decorated with flowers and ribbons. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. "Because this is where my real life began," he replied, "and I want to renew our vows right here where it all started." The ceremony was simple but moving. The priest who had married them 25 years earlier had passed away, but his replacement knew the couple's story well. "Daniel James and Grace," he said, "you are living proof that true love overcomes all barriers. May your union continue to be an inspiration to our community." When they exchanged their vows again, both had tears in their eyes. "Grace, 25 years ago you stepped down from a wagon and completely changed my life. Today, renewing our vows, I want to say that you still surprise me and make me want to be a better man every day. Daniel James, 25 years ago you gave me the chance to show who I was inside. Today I want to thank you for being brave enough to look beyond first impressions and for building with me a life full of love, respect, and purpose." The kiss that sealed the renewal of their vows was witnessed by their three children, by Mrs. Margaret, now 85 but still lucid, and by dozens of friends and neighbors who had followed the couple's journey. That night at home, Grace reflected on everything they had lived through. "You know what amazes me most about our story," she said. "What?" "How people changed. Those who at first looked at us with prejudice now treat us with genuine respect. And it wasn't because we changed our appearance, but because they learned to look beyond it. And do you think that always happens? Not always, but it happens when we consistently set an example that we are worthy of respect, and when we have the patience to wait for people to overcome their prejudices. And if they don't overcome them, then we continue to be worthy anyway, because dignity doesn't depend on others' recognition. Grace's wisdom had deepened over the years. She understood that social change was a slow process, requiring persistence and patience. Years later, when they were already grandparents, Daniel, James, and Grace received a special tribute from the City Hall. The street where St. Margaret's Ranch was located was renamed Grace Harrison Street in recognition of her social work. "It's an honor I don't deserve," she said during the ceremony. "You do deserve it," replied the mayor. "You have transformed our city through your work, education, and example of life." When they returned home after the tribute, they found their grandchildren playing in the garden. The children treated their grandparents with complete naturalness, without any strangeness about Grace or William's height. "Grandma, tell us the story of when you met Grandpa," one of the granddaughters requested. Grace smiled and sat down among the children. "Once upon a time there was a young lady who traveled by wagon to meet a young man she had come to know through letters." The children listened attentively, as if it were the first time they were hearing the story. To them, it was just a beautiful love story about their grandparents. There was nothing extraordinary or problematic about the characters' physical difference. "And did they live happily ever after?" asked the youngest grandson. "They lived happily and worked hard to make the world a better place," Grace replied. "Because true happiness comes when we use our lives to help others." In the evening, when the children had gone home and the house grew quiet, Daniel James found Grace in the office, reading a letter from Joy, who was now a respected doctor in the capital, but still sent regular updates. "How is our daughter?" he asked. "Well, she's organizing a rural medicine conference and wants us to participate as speakers." "Speakers about what?" "About overcoming barriers and building productive lives despite adversity." Daniel James sat beside his wife. "Are you going to accept?" "We'll accept. I think it's important to share our experience. If our story can inspire even one person not to give up on their dreams, it's worth it." The invitation to speak at the medical conference was the first of many they would receive over the following years. Universities, social organizations, and companies invited them to talk about overcoming challenges, leadership, and social transformation. "I never imagined our story would interest so many people," Daniel James said after a particularly well-received talk. "It's because our story isn't just ours. It's the story of anyone who has ever been judged by their appearance, faced prejudice, or needed courage to pursue their dreams." "And what is the main message you want to convey?" "That we are all capable of extraordinary things when we have the opportunity and necessary support, and that we should judge people by their character, not their appearance." During one of these speaking trips, they met a young girl who had been born with the same condition as Grace. The 15-year-old girl was discouraged because she thought she would never find someone to love her. "I'll always be different," she said sadly. "No one will want to marry me." Grace sat beside the teenager and held her hands. "My dear, you're not different. You're unique like all people, and someone who deserves you will love you exactly as you are." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've lived it. I found a man who has loved me for over 30 years, had 3 wonderful children, and built a life full of purpose. And you can do the same." "But it's hard." "It is hard, yes. But all good things in life require effort. The important thing is not to give up on your dreams." The conversation with the young girl reinforced for Grace the importance of continuing to share her story. How many people around the world faced the same challenges she had? How many needed hope and encouragement? Back home, she proposed a new project to Daniel James. "What if we created a foundation to support people with dwarfism and other similar conditions?" "How would it work?" "It would offer scholarships, psychological support, professional training, and most importantly, it would showcase examples of people who built successful lives despite physical limitations." "That's a wonderful idea. Let's do this." The Grace Foundation was created 2 years later and became a national reference in supporting people with disabilities or physical differences. It offered not only material support, but mainly emotional assistance and examples that it was possible to overcome any obstacle. "The most important thing isn't the money we offer," Grace would tell the foundation team. "It's hope. It's showing these people they're capable of anything." When Grace turned 60, the party at the ranch gathered over 500 guests. People from all over Brazil came to celebrate the life of a woman who had become a symbol of overcoming and social transformation. During the party, a book about her life was officially launched, written by a journalist who had followed her work for years. Grace had finally accepted having her story told, understanding it could inspire thousands of people. "This book isn't about me," she said during the launch. "It's about all people facing prejudice and adversity. It's to show that it's possible to overcome any barrier when we have determination, hard work, and people who believe in us." The book became a national and international success, being translated into several languages. Grace donated all royalties to the foundation, ensuring resources to further expand the work. "You've become far more than you imagined when you stepped off that wagon," Daniel James said one quiet evening. "No, my love. I've always been this. I just needed the opportunity to show it. And I almost didn't give you that opportunity. But you did. And that's what matters. You had the courage to overcome first impressions and discover who I truly was. And if I hadn't had that courage, then you would have missed the chance to live a full life, and I would have lost the love of my life. But that didn't happen. We're here, after more than 30 years, still in love, and still building good things together." Daniel James kissed his wife's forehead tenderly. "Thank you for insisting on staying when I was confused and scared. Thank you for giving true love a chance." They stayed silent for a few minutes, rocking in their porch chairs and listening to the nighttime sounds of the ranch that remained their home. "Grace, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Have you ever regretted anything in our life together?" Grace thought for a moment before answering. "Just one thing. Sometimes I regret taking so long to fully accept that I'm worthy of love and respect. I could have been more confident from the start." "But you were always confident." "No, Daniel James. I pretended to be confident. Inside, I was always afraid of not being enough, of you having regrets, of people rejecting me. Only with time did I learn that my worth doesn't depend on others' approval." "And when did that change?" "When our first daughter was born, and I held her in my arms. In that moment, I understood I had created a perfect life, and therefore I was also perfect in my own way. If God gave me the ability to create life, it's because He considered me worthy of that responsibility." Grace's answer deeply moved Daniel James. Even after so many years together, she could still surprise him with her wisdom and depth. "And you?" she asked. "Do you have any regrets?" "Just one. I regret spending time worrying about others' opinions early in our marriage. I could have enjoyed those first months better if I hadn't always been thinking about what people would say. But it was natural to have those concerns. You were raised in a society that values certain things and judges others. It took time for you to develop your own values." "That's true. But today, I know that the only opinion that matters about our marriage is our own." "And what is your opinion?" "That it was the best decision I ever made in my life. That you made me a better man in every way. That our life together surpassed any dream I could have had." Grace smiled in the dark. "I also think we made the right choice. We built a life full of love, purpose, and meaning. And we raised children who will continue doing good in the world. Our legacy. Yes, our legacy. But not just the children. Also all the lives we've touched, all the people we've helped, all the minds we've changed. That is also our legacy." When Mrs. Margaret passed away peacefully at 92, the entire region attended the funeral. She had become a respected matriarch, but her greatest pride was always the transformation of the family through her son's marriage. "Before she left, she told me one thing," Daniel James told Grace after the burial. "What was it?" "She said she married off 3 children, 1 blood son, which is me, and 2 daughters of the heart, which are you and Joy, and that of all the marriages, ours brought the most happiness to the family. She was a wise woman. It took her a while to accept me, but when she did, she truly loved me, like a mother loves a daughter. The death of her mother-in-law saddened Grace, but it also made her reflect on the passage of time and the importance of cherishing every moment with the people we love. "Life is shorter than we imagine," she told her children when they gathered for the funeral. "That's why it's important not to waste time with prejudices, grudges, or fears. It's important to love, forgive, and build good things while we have time." Joy, now over 30 and a mother of 2, took the opportunity to make an announcement to the family. "Mom, Dad, I've decided to come back here for good. I want to take over the leadership of the hospital you created and expand the medical services in the region." The news gladdened Grace's heart. Having her daughter back meant continuity for the work she had built throughout her life. "Are you sure? In the capital you have many more opportunities for professional growth. But here I can make a real difference. In the capital I'm just another doctor. Here I can transform lives like you did." William also announced his plans. He had graduated in engineering and wanted to return to modernize the agricultural operations in the region, developing equipment adapted for people with different types of physical limitations. "I want anyone, regardless of height or limitation, to be able to work in agriculture with dignity and efficiency," he said. Margaret, the youngest, was finishing her teaching degree and also planned to return to expand the rural schools created by her mother. "Education is the foundation of everything," she said. "I want to ensure that every child in this region has access to quality education." Seeing her 3 children decide to dedicate their lives to continuing the work she and Daniel James had started was Grace's greatest fulfillment. "We planted the seeds," she told her husband that night, "and they will harvest and plant again. The circle is complete." "Are you proud of them?" "Very proud, but not just because they chose to continue our work. I'm proud because they are people of integrity, generosity, and commitment to the common good. They learned from the best example. They learned from both of us. You were a wonderful father, Daniel James. You taught our children to be men and women of character." In the following years, the return of the children brought new energy to the region. Joy transformed the small hospital into a reference in rural medicine, serving patients from various neighboring towns. William created a company of adapted agricultural equipment that became known nationally. Margaret expanded the rural education system, creating schools that served as models for other regions. "They've surpassed our achievements," observed Daniel James with pride. "That's how it should be," responded Grace. "Each generation should go further than the last. We created the foundation, they built upon it." When Grace turned 70, the celebration was different. Instead of a traditional party, she asked to organize a gathering of all the people who had benefited from the social projects over the years. Hundreds came, former students from the rural schools who were now teachers, doctors, engineers, women who had received microcredit and now had thriving businesses, young people with dwarfism or other physical differences who had received scholarships and become successful professionals. "You are my greatest birthday gift," she said during the gathering. "Seeing that you've transformed the opportunities you had into productive and happy lives is the greatest joy I can have." One of the former students, now a doctor, gave an emotional speech. "Mrs. Grace, you didn't just give us education or money. You gave us something far more valuable, the certainty that we are capable of overcoming any obstacle. You taught us that our worth doesn't depend on how others see us, but on how we see ourselves." During the gathering, the Grace Harrison Rural University was officially launched, a higher education institution focused on sustainable agriculture, rural medicine, and inclusive education. It was the family's most ambitious project, funded by the profits from the ranches and donations from admirers around the world. "This university will ensure that the knowledge and values we've built continue to be passed on to future generations," said William during the launch ceremony. The creation of the university represented the pinnacle of Grace's work. Seeing a higher education institution created in her honor, dedicated to the values she had always championed, was the ultimate fulfillment of her life. "My father would be proud," she said with tears in her eyes. "He always dreamed that I could study at a university. Now others like me will have that opportunity." Daniel James, now over 75 but still sharp and active, watched his wife with renewed admiration. "You've achieved everything you dreamed of and much more." "We've achieved. None of this would be possible without you by my side all these years. And we still have time for more accomplishments. We still have time to be happy and watch our grandchildren grow up. That's already more than enough for me." On the last night of the commemorative gathering, after all the guests had left, Grace and Daniel James were alone on the porch of St. Margaret's Ranch, in the same spot where they had spent so many nights throughout nearly 40 years of marriage. "If you could go back in time and change anything in our story, what would you change?" asked Daniel James. Grace thought for a long time before answering. "Absolutely nothing," she said finally. "Every difficulty we faced made us stronger. Every prejudice we overcame taught us about human nature. Every victory we achieved gave us strength to help other people. Not even those early difficult days when I was confused about our future. Especially those days, they were important for you to discover your own values and for me to discover my own strength. If you had accepted me immediately, without questioning, perhaps we would never have developed the depth of love and respect we have today. Do you really believe that? I do. Love that grows slowly, based on knowledge and conscious choice, is more lasting than love at first sight. We've chosen to love each other every day for nearly 40 years. This is far more valuable than a sudden passion." Daniel James took his wife's hand and kissed it tenderly. "Grace, there's something I've never told you, but think about every day." "What is it?" "You're the bravest person I know. You faced prejudice, overcame limitations, transformed an entire community, and still found time to be a loving wife and dedicated mother. I feel honored to share my life with you." "Daniel James, you talk as if I did everything alone, but you were my partner every step of the way. When I doubted myself, you gave me strength. When I dreamed too big, you helped me make those dreams reality. When I needed courage, you were by my side. We made a good team, the best team possible." They fell silent, listening to the familiar sounds of the night, crickets chirping, wind in the trees, the distant murmur of the creek that ran through the property. "What do you want people to remember about our story?" asked Grace. "I want them to remember that true love sees no physical differences, that two committed people can transform not only their own lives, but the life of an entire community. And I want them to remember that every person has value, regardless of appearance or limitations, that we should give everyone opportunities to show their potential. Our story proves both those things. It does, and I hope it inspires others to overcome their own prejudices and pursue their dreams despite adversity." The next morning they received an unexpected visitor. It was the young woman with dwarfism they had met years earlier during a lecture. Now she had graduated from law school, was married, and expecting her first child. "I came to thank you," she said. "When I spoke with you, I felt hopeless. I thought I'd never have a normal life. Today I have everything I ever dreamed of." "We're very happy for you," said Grace, hugging the young woman. "But you achieved all this yourself. We just showed you it was possible. Sometimes that's all we need, to know it's possible, to see an example of someone who succeeded." The young woman's visit reinforced for Grace the importance of continuing to share her experience. Even at 70 years old, she still received letters from people asking for advice and encouragement. "I never thought our personal story could have such a big impact," said Daniel James after the visitor left. "It's because our story isn't unique. Millions of people face prejudice and adversity every day. When they see it's possible to overcome, it gives them hope." "And what would you say to someone facing the same challenges you faced?" "I'd say it's difficult, but worth it. That the most important thing is not to let others' prejudices define your worth, that we should work hard, be persistent, and never give up on our dreams. And about love? What would you say to someone who thinks they'll never find someone to love them? I'd say true love exists, but it might take time to appear. And while it hasn't happened yet, it's important to love yourself first. When we love and respect ourselves, that shines through and attracts people who value us." In the following years, Grace remained active in her social projects despite her advanced age. At 75, she still visited rural schools, still counseled people seeking advice, still organized fundraising events for the foundation. Daniel James, now 80, had slowed down but remained involved in managing the ranches, now primarily run by their children. "Don't you think about retiring?" Joy teased her mother. "Retire from what? From helping people? Only when I can no longer walk." Grace's energy amazed everyone around her. Even with the physical limitations of age, she maintained the same enthusiasm and determination from her early years. "Where do you get so much energy?" asked Daniel James one afternoon when she had spent the day organizing a literacy campaign. "From purpose," she replied simply. "When you know why you're living, you don't run out of energy to live. And what is your purpose? To make the world a little better than it was when I arrived in it. To leave a legacy of love, education, and opportunities for the people who come after us. I think you've already fulfilled that purpose with plenty to spare. It's never completely fulfilled. There's always more to do, more people to help, more prejudices to overcome." Grace's determination to continue working at 75 inspired a new generation of social activists. Young people from across the country came to visit her to learn about leadership and social transformation. "Mrs. Grace is proof that age is just a number," said a university student who came to do research about her. "At 75, she has more energy and vision for the future than many young people." The observation made Grace laugh. "That's because I don't think about age. I think about what I can still do, not what I've already done." During one of these visits, a journalist asked what had been the greatest challenge of her life. "The greatest challenge wasn't overcoming others' prejudice," she replied, after reflecting. "It was overcoming my own prejudice against myself. Learning to accept and love myself was harder than gaining acceptance from others." "And how did you overcome that?" "With time, with the love of my family, and especially by understanding that my worth isn't in my body, but in my soul, my mind, and my heart." What advice would you give to other people struggling with low self-esteem? To focus on what they can give to the world, not on what they think they lack. When we focus on contributing, on helping, on creating value for others, we discover our own worth. Grace's wisdom had deepened over the years. Her words were quoted in books, articles, and speeches around the world. When she turned 80, Grace received a national tribute. The President of the Republic created a special medal recognizing her contribution to education and social inclusion in the country. "Grace Harrison represents the best of the American spirit," he said during the ceremony. "Through work, determination, and kindness, she transformed not only her own life but the lives of thousands of people." The ceremony was broadcast on national television, and Grace took the opportunity to give a speech about values and hope. "My story isn't special because I'm different," she said. "It's special because it shows that all people, regardless of how they look on the outside, have the capacity for great achievements when they receive opportunities and support. I hope my journey especially inspires women, people with disabilities, and all those who face prejudice. You are capable of everything you dream of. Don't let the ignorance of some define the limits of your life." The speech was seen by millions of people and generated a wave of messages of support and gratitude from across the country. End of story. So, what did you think of this story of overcoming and love? Grace teaches us that a person's worth isn't in their appearance, but in their character and determination. Do you believe Daniel James made the right decision? Leave your opinions about this beautiful journey of transformation and growth in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like if the story touched you, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one.